Okay. Namaste and thank you all for coming to this last seminar of 2024. Um, we have a very rare kind of a speaker in the sense that he was a professional. When I met Srikanth first, this would be 2002-ish. He was at that time a PhD student at Brown. And then after his PhD, he worked for 15 years. And then just before COVID, he decided to relocate to India. He was with the Chinmaya Foundation for some time. Now he has decided to kind of give his entire life to dissemination of Vedanta. So a very rare quality in that sense. And he will speak on a topic which I think is of a lot of interest, especially to students. And that is the nexus or the linkages between science and Vedanta. As you saw in the email that I sent, many people have this, I think, mistaken notion that, oh, we are scientists, oh, we follow science, ergo, therefore, we cannot be associated with religion/spirituality. And that doesn't really stand the scrutiny because both, in our case, Vedanta and science, they both profess to seek truth. So if that be the goal, then doesn't really matter what path you choose and how you look at how this process evolves of understanding truth or getting the truth. So I think a dialogue is very necessary. But of course, we need to also look at what are the boundaries and what are the domains. Some people, as I said, believe that these domains are completely exclusive. But many do not agree to that. And so there is an overlap. There is room for debate and dialogue. So no better person, because Srikanth, as I said, when he decided to relocate to India and then he was with the Chinmaya International Foundation, he did a very deep study of the scriptures or the text Prasthanatrayi especially. And so he's the best person today to talk to us about how we can relate science and Vedanta. So Srikanth, over to you. You can share your slides now.
I'll do that. Thank you, sir. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see your screen, but not your slide. Yeah,
Okay.
now it is.
Yeah, I'm just opening the slides. Is it okay now?
Yes, perfect. Yes. Go ahead, Srikanth. And so I would request the rest of us to mute ourselves. And Srikanth, you can speak for about 40-45 minutes uninterrupted, after which we will have Q&A.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for coming to this talk. And as Professor Sukalyanji has introduced the topic already, I'll not delve on that much for much time. It's basically the idea is there's always a debate that goes on between science and Vedanta in general. I mean, people who are in either of these fields, and as Professor Kalyanji was saying, there is always this skepticism towards religion from the scientist point of view. And I would also would like to add, there is other element too. Those who are practicing religion also have some kind of skepticism towards science too. So I think there is that that idea that we are, even in a way, that feeling is there that we are superior to the people following the other field, and also kind of blind faith in a way, or blind in the sense, not faith in the blind to the other fields strengths and weaknesses too, and also by one's own field. So let's look at those points clearly. First, what is science, what is Vedanta, what are the as Professor Sukalanji was saying, we should know the domain of applicability, what is the reality that each of these fields actually subscribe to, and so on. And then let us get a clarity of how they can be uh, either harmonized or where they differ, both ways. Okay, we'll see both of those points. So with that, let me proceed further. Next slide. So as I was saying, there may be four kinds of participants in the seminar or in this talk, and also generally speaking, there's first group of people who may think like, both fields are uh, applicable. Like in simultaneously, I can practice both of them. Or what is being said in science, what is being practiced as what we call as scientific practices and field and methods. At the same time, even in the religion, I can be religious and follow all the religious practices too. So they probably don't have many of those what you call as a tussle or anything like a friction between these two, when they can seamlessly move from one field to the other. Then maybe there are two other sets of people, set 2 and set 3. What I'm saying here is one who subscribes to one particular field and may not have much interest or even have or inkling about other field, or also may know about other field but also in a very negative way, saying like, that's not good enough, or it's not applicable to me or whatever. So all those kinds of either positive, neutral, or negative feelings may be there, but may not be serious enough practicing or looking into the other field. So let's look at those two sets of people too, and see how we can address concerns or even their viewpoints in this talk too. And then the fourth set may be like people who really don't care. I mean, science and Vedanta, it doesn't matter what they talk about and what they do. For me, my personal life is just to have some comfortable thing going on, with me and with my family, and that's about it. That's okay. So I would think the talk will not be very, of course, not applicable to set 4 anyway if they don't care. Maybe if it convinces them to take up something, that's well and good. And the first set may be people, if they are not informed about the nuances and details about either of the field, it may be more of an information rather, and maybe convincing more about what they have been already practicing or holding as a view. And for the other two sets, set 2 and set 3, where they subscribe to one particular field, and if hopefully if they're not looking down upon others who are following the other field, maybe it will open up new channels for them to think about, and also be open about even practicing other field in their own life if possible. So let's see how it goes from here, and we maybe at the end of the session we can even discuss those points too. As I was saying, there's always this continuous tussle, and this tussle actually, it can be at a very global scale, macro scale, like what we saw in medieval Europe, where things were really head on between religion and science. A lot of friction, not only friction, actually it was violence, I would say, to some extent. People were even um, killed, or things like that happened over that period. But later on, nowadays, at least a modern setup, we don't see of that nature, but there is general skepticism, debates, and so on in the arena of either in scientific seminars or in religious circles too, either way. But by and large, I would say people stick to their own fields and talk about the strengths of their own field, and rather not listen to the other person's point of view or other field's point of view, only because of some inherent weaknesses within themselves. Like either they are refusing to see the other point of view just because of their, sometimes their pride or ego, whatever they have, or sometimes they're just lazy enough not to even explore the other field. Or sometimes it could be even peer pressure, like if I do something of, say, if a scientist thinks, if I go to a religious say place like a temple or anything, what would other people think of me? Maybe their peers are not subscribing to that view and they want to belong to that peer group. So then that kind of keeps them restrained, not to explore the other area. And then simply could be the fear of unknown. Sometimes people are a little bit tentative, right? Generally sometimes they don't like to explore new things. They're more comfortable and feel more at home sticking to what they're already comfort or know. So maybe the fear of unknown is there sometimes. So whatever be the case, there's always this tussle that happens, and within oneself, and also with the people that they interact with. So there will be some debate sometimes happens even within a family or a friend circle or social circle. All that is fine. Sometimes those are if everything is happens in a very in an amicable way, which is more to understand the viewpoints rather than to be argumentative and trying to put down other people. That's not the point anyway. The debate could be more information gathering and also helping oneself. So that is also fine. But the important point I want to address is the tussle that happens within oneself. That is the more, I think, the critical one that we need to address. Because it doesn't matter what other people's viewpoints are and what they think about these two areas, the science and Vedanta. But what I think about science and Vedanta, I think that's more important. And that's what we need to focus upon. Because ultimately, we as an individual need to see that how we can benefit from both of them, taking the strengths of both and applying them in our life so that we can enrich and benefit from from these two areas. So I think that should be our focus rather than looking at a very um, more of a debate and a fight point of view with other people or of other areas of interest. Rather, I would say that it should be more of an internal debate, healthy debate rather, by exploring both the areas and then study and see that what applies to me and how I can benefit from both of them. So let's look at from that point of view of this whole study. Okay, thank you. Then to the next slide. So let's define some of these terms first. What is science? Science basically means a system of knowledge, and of course all of you are from that scientific background, so I don't think we need to dive deep into this. Basically there'll be some kind of problem definition that we come up with generally, and then we collect data through observation experiment, and then formulate some hypothesis and test that hypothesis again, either ourselves or through the peers. The peers again review our work, and then they go ahead and study what we have formulated and either corroborate or suggest some changes or whatever. And that's how the science, the body of knowledge, grows. So generally, sciences we can classify into three streams, I would say: more of physical and natural sciences, which depend primarily on observation and experimentation. I would put them as physics, chemistry, biology. And then there is a social science, which includes both the psychology and anthropology and sociology. They deal with human behavior, cultural dynamics, or societies. And lastly, there's an applied science also, which more relates to technology. Whatever we have acquired as scientific knowledge, how do we apply it so that either as a human race we can benefit, or as an environment to save the environment or nature itself, what kind of technologies we can develop so that it will be a benefit to the entire human race and nature in the long run. So my talk primarily will focus on the physical and natural sciences and some portion of applied sciences. So let's move ahead with whenever I say the word term science, it refers to either the physical science or the applied science. Okay, one of those two areas. And the term Vedanta, I think many of you are maybe aware, but if those who are not, I would just like to explore a little bit of the meaning of the word Vedanta also. Vedanta means literally it means the end of the Vedas. That's the technical meaning, Vedanta in Sanskrit. And what is meant by the end of the Vedas? The end doesn't mean physical end of the Vedas. If you take a Veda as a book, it doesn't mean that it comes at the physical end, like the end of the book. But what it means is, as a knowledge, it's a culmination, it's the pinnacle. So it's the highest knowledge, you can say. And that's how we call it as Upanishads are the Vedanta itself. Upanishads are the knowledge which deal with the reality of this world and myself, and that's how it's called as the highest knowledge. And when we say Vedanta, what we mean by Vedanta is actually the Upanishads itself. And some of you might have already heard there are various names of text called Upanishads, and all those actually or as a body of knowledge, what we call that as Vedanta. And Veda also literally means knowledge. Okay, the Veda itself means knowledge. But it has other portions besides this Upanishadic portion, what we call as Karma Kanda, which is dealing with rituals and other rituals practices, religious practices. But our focus will be mostly on the Vedanta part, which is the knowledge of the reality and world, knowledge of the reality of the world and myself, what we call as Upanishads. And how old are these texts called Vedas? Actually, the Vedas as a text, maybe the written format came much later. But traditionally, they were orally passed from guru to shishya. There's a date that actually is unknown, really. Strictly speaking, we call it, of course, within the Orthodox circles, they would say it's eternal. In fact, Vedas even preceded the creation itself. But if you go by even say historical point of view, it's simply, we can say it's unknown. Although I think many modern scholars say it's about 5,000 years old, but I would think it's more of in a format where it is currently available. Maybe it came over in that time frame, but actually as a body of knowledge, Vedas must have been much older. And there are various streams of Vedanta. There is a Dvaita Vedanta, Vishishtadvaita Vedanta, and Advaita Vedanta. For this talk, we will confine ourselves to Advaita Vedanta, and we will talk about the details of that philosophy or the darshana actually, where Advaita Vedanta in next few slides. And Vedanta is a darshana. We don't call it as philosophy, although I may use the term philosophy because there's no equivalent of word darshana in English. In Sanskrit, darshana means simply worldview, a vision. So Vedanta is presenting a worldview to us in a way that it is not a philosophy. The idea of philosophy is you can have some intellectual knowledge and it can be convincing to you, and that's basically enough. And that is called as philosophy in general, as a definition, if you want to put it that way. Whereas Vedanta is more of an experiential one. Unless it is proven, and unless proven, of course, as an experience, not as a what you call experienced by oneself, of course, that's primary, and also by others too. That's why the Eastern way of looking at any philosophy is more of a darshana. There are 6 darshanas, and one of the 6 is actually we call Vedanta. There are 5 other darshanas also, and all these have been in practice, and also have been in the mainstay for a long time. And our focus is on Vedanta, as I said, and that too particularly Advaita Vedanta in this talk. And what is religion now? Okay, we have introduced Vedanta as a philosophical point. As I said, I'll use the word philosophy just for the lack of word in English, but you can imagine it is what is meant as darshana there in Sanskrit. But I will be using the word philosophy for the simplicity. Now, religion, what is religion? Religion is basically a set of dogmas and practices. And they basically are like a practical application of these truths that are described in Vedanta. So you have something of a philosophical truth, and how to apply them in life is where the religion comes in. And of course, it is very concretized, very grossified to some extent, you can say. Is that philosophical viewpoint is more at the level of, say, at a very subtle level, but when we come to day-to-day interactions, how to use them, how to apply them in our life, that's where religion comes in. And that's, I think, the primary portion of the religion. Although, again, I need to add a caveat, but that's not the way things are generally practiced, at least nowadays. What we see is more of a religion is seen as more of a, sometimes more of a social gathering, sometimes more for there is a belief system, of course, that there's a higher superior authority called God, and if I pray to that God, I may get some benefits from God, whatever I like to have. So even that kind of practices, of course, form a part of religion. But if you take more of a purist point of view, religion is simply subscribing to the Vedantic truths, the philosophical truths, but applying them in our life, so that ultimately the whatever the philosophical truths those religious practices are based upon, they actually become experiential. They actualize in our life. So that is the main part of actually the religion, disregarding all other aspects which are in play in modern times now. What is the fundamental difference between an applied science and applied Vedantic truth, what we call as religion? Whereas in applied science, what we do is we take for granted whatever the scientific laws are, right? And we don't have to personally explore whether they are true, and what kind of transformation whether that happens in my life by following such laws. Those are not the focus. Applied science is simply that take those laws in whatever is being prescribed as a formulation, as a scientific law, and then apply that, and you see that how I can make a technology which will be better for human comfort, or as I said, even for nature and environment in general, and so on. So that is basically the idea of applied science, or the focus of applied science. Whereas, as I said, religion, its focus is more to realize whatever the philosophical truths that we have been prescribed. So in a way, it's a scientific experiment that is actually trying to prove whatever the theory says, right? If you say Vedantic truths are like theory for me because I'm still exploring them, I haven't realized it. To realize it, I need to practice somehow, and these practices are what we call as religion. And these practices, of course, start with an assumption, because those philosophical truths are not yet actualized or not experiential to me yet at this point, but I take them for granted that they are true, and I set upon myself to prove that they are true, and that's how the religious practices come in. So we actually take those truths as a foundation, as given premise to be proven true, and we change our lives so that while practicing those truths, our lives get transformed, and we in fact realize that truth, whatever has been set upon as a premise first to begin with. So you can say actually religion in that sense is more like an experiment. It's an ongoing experiment until the final truth is realized. So in that sense, it is actually more of a scientific method. Only thing that you begin with a certain amount of faith, of course. That's true with any of the scientific experiment that we do in laboratory too. We have to assume certain things to begin with, and then we move ahead and check and verify finally that whatever we assumed actually is right. And that's how we prove that that formulation or law that we have assumed is actually the right one. It's the same thing with the religion too. So now for this talk, I would rather think the fair comparison would be to compare the philosophical version, which we call as Vedanta, and science, rather than religion, because religion is simply an application of that same truth. So rather, I would say we should focus upon Vedanta, which is more of the underlying basis for all the religion itself. And when I say Vedanta, now of course there are and religion, there are so many other streams too, right? I mean, I'm talking from very particular point of view of Sanatana Dharma, which is practiced mostly in India. But you could say this similar discussion and similar arguments can be put forward for other religions also, although there may not be a very clear demarcation as much as we probably see in Hinduism, so-called Sanatana Dharma. But you can bring it up in that fashion there too, where you can separate the dogmas and practices and also the philosophical truths. As I said, maybe, of course, I'm not very well versed with all religions, but I think in my point of view, maybe it's not as clearly demarcated as in what we see in Sanatana Dharma. Okay, so let's move on to the ontology part. Ontology means what is reality? What is the nature of reality? That's the main focus. So in science, when we say reality, what we clearly define it by reality as that which is perceived by senses and mind, which is observable. And so by the very definition, it means it's a materialistic one. It's observable by senses and mind. When I say materialistic, it doesn't mean just the material that is tangible to touch and all that. It could be even an energy format also. So we can take it as a mass energy continuum, right? Mass and energy are interchangeable, as we know from the Einstein's equation too, right? So take it as all that is tangible by senses and mind. Okay, so that basically the mass energy continuum, and that continuum of mass and energy, what we call as reality, as a materialistic in the materialistic sense. It also has a facet of realism. That means it is basically independent of any human observation. It exists out there. It's basically regardless whether I am here to observe it or not, to perceive it or not. There is certainty called reality there, which is tangible material available for perception, whether the perceiver is there or not, regardless of that, right? That's the point of realism. It also has something called reductionism. Basically you can explain the complex phenomena by understanding simpler uh, the constituent parts of it, in the sense like we have something called multi-scale modeling in physics too, where you have the macro scale and micro scale, and micro scale mechanics sometimes explains the macro scale properties, right? For example, I'm from solid mechanics background, so um, like stress and strain or even crack propagation, all these, they go at a granular level and actually explain the phenomena using the mechanics that happens at the micro scale level. So this reductionism is a core of scientific discoveries and scientific laws, and that's been the trend, and that's how and that's the nature of the reality that we subscribe to, or we actually assign in science. There's one of the other facets I was trying to cover. I'm trying to cover in this is dynamic and relational. That basically it's any new discoveries that happen in science. There's always a room for change, in the sense that the reality that we have come up with, that define the definition that we have come up with, definition of so and so law, suppose that such and such system behaves in such and such a way because of certain laws, certain laws about it. These new discoveries, what they can do is basically if they go contrary to our whatever known body of knowledge, then we need to change that knowledge itself. So there is always that dynamism associated with the knowledge of reality itself in science, and hence it's an ongoing research and probably evergreen area. It will never saturate to that level where it says, okay, we have known enough. There's always something to be known. And either in the, as I said, at the micro scale level, you can go deeper and deeper, or it could be at as a new avenues, like even if you go, say, to another planet or out of solar system, or other in outer space, then maybe new ways of new mechanical laws and scientific laws that have to be discovered, new entities that will be discovered, and we need to come up with laws to explain that phenomena and all that. So there's always a evergreen ongoing research area in science, because it's, and as I said, either the old knowledge has to be changed or new knowledge will be discovered, which will be adding to the existing body of knowledge. Whereas in Vedanta, now if we come to Vedanta, reality, what we define reality here is simply that which doesn't change. It's a very fundamental thing in Vedanta. Reality is that which doesn't change. Now, if we contrast this with what we came up with science earlier in the previous slide, what we call there as objective reality. Reality is out there. It is subject to change because it's materialistic in nature, and also our understanding about it changes, and so we change the scientific laws, and also our understanding of the reality itself is dependent on how our the scientific laws that we have at that point of time, right? So all that is subject to change. And whereas in here in Vedanta, in sharp contrast to it, is that we call it as objective reality is that which is objective reality is unreal, only because it's changing and then that doesn't fit in the definition of Vedanta itself. So the very fact that it's being objectified, when whatever we say as objectified is subject to change, because anything that is an object out there, our perception about that object changes, and technically that's how the change happens in it. And so that's why the reality, what we call as objective reality in science, is not applicable in Vedanta itself. And what Vedanta now, because of the definition of reality as that which doesn't change, what it says is the true essence is that the perceiver, that is the observer and the observed, is of the same reality. Now we need to little bit dive deeper into this, and that's what we'll do the next two slides. Why are we saying that the perceiver and the perceived is the same reality? Whereas in science, it's actually it's very sacrosanct to keep that observed and the observer very as a distinct two entities. Whereas here, the by very definition that the reality is that which doesn't change, we actually come to an understanding that both the perceived and perceived are of the same reality, although they are being perceived as different at the current point of view or current way of experience, but they ultimately are of the same reality, is what is the true um, understanding or true essence in what we call as in Vedanta itself. For example, here I put the equation perceived and perceived is reality. Let's look into this equation and try to derive it in two ways. We will go from the perceived point of view first, and then we will look into the perceiver point of view, and then we bring that equality between the both, and also say that ultimately they both are the reality itself as per Vedanta definition, which is that which doesn't change. So let's look at the perceived point of view. Generally, when we say perceived, okay, one thing in Vedanta is Vedanta doesn't have any particular view saying that there is a world out there. All it says is we are not sure whether there is a world out there or not, but what we are sure about at this point of time is the experiences that we have of what we call as world. And that experience is pretty much internal, right? It's basically in our mind that we form a world that we are seeing. Whether there's a world out there or not is debatable, but that's not the point of interest anyway. For the point of interest for us as in Vedanta is that the experiences that we undergo as say as an individual at the level of mind, let's look into that point of view. So from that point of view, there are various experiences that we have, and all these experiences are basically, we can call it as an object. Object means basically something that can be perceived. So For example, if I in here we have perception, say like I am, you are, there's a chair, and all these are different objects, you can say, and that we are being then that are being perceived. And ultimately what happens is all these perceptions are basically we are forming um, a thought or a modification within our mind, and that is what is triggering as something as an object out there, right? And each of these experiences basically have two components. Okay, they are dual in nature. One is that object itself has a particular characteristics, which are basically the sense characteristics, you can say, or the sense perception, which is like sound, touch, form, taste, and smell. So those form the object characteristics itself. But there's also another characteristic associated with that object, which is basically that easiness. So when I say I am, you are, chair is, the common feature between all these perceptions or experiences is that easiness, right? I exist, that's why I am. You exist, that's why you are. The chair exists, that's why chair is. That easiness is there. That existence attribute is there. And that is a common feature between all the perceptions. So in every perception, there is an easiness or existence attribute associated with that perception. And that existence attribute is common and is also unchanging, because there's no differentiation between the existence of the chair itself and existence of me. That existence attribute is the same. So it is undifferentiated, and it is also unchanging. Whereas the object characteristics are specific to that object, so they keep changing. They change from object to object also, and also change with time, right? The same object will appear differently at different times too. So the properties of that object as it's specific to that object will change, but the existence attribute, which is common to all the perceptions and common to all the basically the objects, that doesn't change. And this existence attribute is basically a qualifier. And qualifier, what I mean by word qualifier means is basically bringing that object into existence, right? It is actually the object exists only because of that attribute of existence. So that's why it is a qualifying that object. So that's why we call it as existent chair. When we say chair is, what we mean is basically in philosophical way you can say as existent chair or existent plant, etc., because that is what we are perceiving, and they have an existence attribute associated with that. Now think about more of an abstract version of this. Now remove the object characteristics completely. We are going by, if you remove the object characteristics, there's existence attribute of that object, each object. If you remove the objectness from that experience, what we have is only existence attribute. But then it's no more an attribute also, because for an attribute as a qualifier, we need a qualified, an object, right? Now, if you remove the object version of it, say object characteristics completely, then what we have is something called as pure existence. Now, this pure existence is an abstraction. It's not experienceable, as in the sense of as a sense of existence attribute. Existence attribute is experienceable only because it's associated with an object which can be perceived, whereas pure existence is simply an abstract version of it, which is not experienceable, but nevertheless it is the basis, because without that there's no existence attribute also. This pure existence is what actually is renders that object to exist. You can say, for example, if I take a lighted room, okay, you suppose we are in a lighted room and there is light in the room, of course, that's what we mean. And we look at our hand first. When we look at our hand, in on this hand, what we are seeing is the two things. First is, of course, the hand itself. Again, as I said, the characteristics of hand will be there specific to that hand. But there's also another thing that we are perceiving is the light itself. And only in the presence of that light are we able to see that hand. Suppose if I remove that hand from the view, if I just move away from the hand, and now what will I see? Technically, I won't be seeing anything. You may say that I'm seeing light, but light is not visible to us because light is not experienced by the senses. You need an object for the light to be experienced also. So in the same way, just like that analogy, pure existence is there. Only things that for it to be perceived, there must be an object which brings it tangible to our senses, and that's how the existence attribute of that object is what is perceivable, what we call as that isness of that object, and that is basically the pure existence itself. Only thing is that because it cannot be perceived, the pure existence cannot be perceived, we have to have some tangible object to be even able to perceive that pure existence in the sense of an existence attribute of that object. So pure existence is pervasive, eternal, and it's not limited by object. In Vedanta, what we call this desha kala vastu aparichinna. Basically, it means it is not limited by space, it is not limited by time, and it is not limited by object. So what is it is not limited by space means the pure existence cannot be only at a specific location in space. In fact, space exists in pure existence. Even for that space, we call it an space exists, right? Space is also an object in that matter. So space also exists. So space has an existence attribute. So basically, pure existence is the underlying substratum or the underlying basis even for space, and hence pure existence is pervasive in the sense it is not limited by space. Same way eternal, it's again pure existence cannot be like coming into being at certain point of time. It was always there, it will always be there, because if it was not there before, then it was non-existence, right? And how can a non-existence become existence? You cannot have that transition. Non-existence cannot become existence, or existence cannot become non-existence. That basically violates even a fundamental law, right? Even like it's like saying matter can be created and destroyed. But no, matter is matter. It is always there. Only thing, it changes forms. That's in the physical way of putting it, rather. But in the philosophical way, what we say is existence always is there. And the third one is about not limited by object. One object limits the other object, right? They cannot coexist in the same physical space. The boundaries of one object limits the boundaries of the other object, or the limitation of one object is seen in the other object also. But if, as you see, as a pure existence, it is pervasive. It is not limited by any object, because even if that object, suppose if we say pure existence is confined to an object, if that object is gone, the pure existence also goes away? No, because that space that exists where that object was not there still exists. That isness is there for the space also. So in that sense, pure existence is always there. It is not limited by any object, and also not limited by space and time. So what we have proved at this point is that the perceived object, which has the dual characteristics, which is the changing sensory perception, sensory characteristics, sensory properties, and also the unchanging existence attribute. This unchanging existence attribute the main is what makes that object sustain, exist, and hence it is actually the true essence of it. And that's how, and the existence attribute we have seen as a quality is a pure existence itself. Only it comes and goes only because of the association with the object. So as a quality, it is pure existence itself, and hence the object itself is pure existence. So that's how the analysis goes in Vedanta, that every object, everything that we perceive is basically pure existence. Okay, here to churn through a little bit of this intellectual analysis to come to that conclusion. But I hope it was a bit clear to you. Otherwise, we can discuss later also if you have any questions on this. Now, let's come to the perceiver side. Now, perceiver side, we will go through a different way. You can go through the existence way also, what we have done for the perceived, but we'll go here in a different way. What we'll see is, as a perceiver, there is something called sentience in us, that illuminating factor, that awareness factor within us, right? As a perceiver, as an individual like me, suppose I have something of an awareness. Anything that I perceive, it comes into my awareness. I bring that object into my awareness. How is that illuminating factor? When you use the word illumination in Vedanta, it means bringing into awareness. So illuminating is not a physical illumination like light. You can think about it as bringing into awareness, into mental awareness. How is that object coming into my awareness? That we should pay attention to. So what we state is, in the perceiver and perceived distinction that is seen or experienced now is permissible in Vedanta, and what we call that as transactional reality. That is what actually science also deals up or dwells upon. Whereas in the Vedantic sense, that actual reality is that illuminator, which brings both this perceiver and perceived into awareness, and hence what we call that as Brahman here in Vedanta. That is the reality. So that is the distinction, you can say, between reality in science and reality in Vedanta. In reality in science, what we say is the distinction of multiplicity and objects and all intact, and and the transaction or interaction between that is what is handled by science as scientific laws and all that. Whereas in Vedanta, we are going one step further to so to say, is that we're looking at the core of that perceived and the nature of all that, and then stripping away all the distinct properties of it, and we're looking at the commonality, that common essence that basically is the substratum of both those, perceiver and perceived. And in the perceived, what we saw it as a pure existence. In perceiver, what we call that as multiple, there are multiple perceivers, like you, me, and some other person, and so on. You can say there are multiple perceivers, but the commonality of that multiple perceivers is what is that illuminating factor, and that illuminating factor is common, and that is not multiple. Again, it is basically undifferentiated. Just like in pure existence we had undifferentiated pure existence, or existence attribute also was pure, was undifferentiated. Here also the same way, the perceiver at the level of at the true essence of that illuminator is common between for all the perceivers and is undifferentiated. So it's basically unitary, so to say. When I say unitary, again the word may be misleading, as if there are multiplicity, but unitary means that's the only one. And how does the illumination happen? That illumination doesn't, again, as I said, illumination is not any physical act here. It's just a mere presence. That self, that the conscious factor within us, what we call as Brahman or the self, Ātman in Sanskrit also, that that is self-luminous. It is like for example, what they say is like an analogy is the sun. The sun is shining. In the presence of the sun, in that sunlight of in the presence of the sunlight, all the objects function, right? Whole earth, everything on this earth functions, right? But the sun is not activating them directly, or propelling them to move, or to act. It is simply present there, and under its illumination everything happens. So in the same way, the self, which is the illuminating factor within us, it's in this mere presence, all these perceptions, everything happens. The perceiver perceiving the objects and so on. It's just an illuminating factor that is there, which brings that awareness of those objects into to the perceiver. And this Brahman, what we call as, so there's the idea of witness consciousness. What we call as witnesses, there is that non-participating reality, which is just witnessing whatever is happening without any active involvement, and what we call as sakshi. You might have heard the word sakshi also. And this again, in essence, is the same, that absolute reality which is permanent, and which you call as the consciousness. Now you can, just like what we did the exercise in pure existence case, where we have abstracted the existence attributes of various objects and came to that single unitary one called pure existence. Here also we can do the same way, as there are so many consciousness factors with multiple perceivers. Remove the perceiver aspect of it, like remove the particularity of perceivers. What we retain or remains is only basically the consciousness, witness consciousness. And that when you have removed the associating factor of it, that consciousness is no more multiplicity. Actually, there's no multiplicity in consciousness, but there's no even perception of multiplicity with that consciousness anymore. And that we call as the pure consciousness. So ultimately, the pure consciousness is what is the perceiver itself. So in the perceived case, what we said is the perceived is a pure existence, and in the perceiver case, what we have arrived at is perceiver is a pure consciousness itself. So the pure consciousness and the pure existence is what we need to show or prove that actually they are same, right? Like that's the reality. Like that completes the equation for us. So let's move ahead for that further. So if, say, for that argument's sake, if we say if existence is not consciousness, we are about to prove now pure existence is pure consciousness, right? Suppose if we say pure existence is not pure consciousness, then what happens? Whatever is not consciousness is basically inert. Inert in the sense it doesn't have any conscious factor associated with it. And that means it's changeful. All inert are changeful. You can take any materialistic object, anything. It's basically changeful. The nature of that materialistic materialistic object is basically changefulness, and that means it's subject to birth and death, right? Changeful means they have certain point they come into existence, and certain point they die. I mean, they go into non-existence. So what it shows is, if you begin with an assumption that if existence is not consciousness, there is a chance that existence becomes non-existence, because death is also there and birth is also there. So prior to birth it was non-existent, and post to death, after death, it is also non-existent. So what we have come to is a contradiction, that existence can become non-existence, which is a contradiction. So existence is actually consciousness, is what is the is actually the correct one. In the same way, if you go with the consciousness not existence, suppose, then what it means is consciousness is non-existence, right? Because we're saying it's not an existence, as that assumption we begin with. So even to say that consciousness is not existence, we need consciousness to be there, right? Consciousness is basically a illuminating factor to bring into awareness, to bring this fact of consciousness not being existence. We need that illuminating factor to be there, and hence the consciousness cannot be non-existence. Consciousness has to be existence always. So we have shown on both sides that existence is consciousness and consciousness is existence. So in that sense, we have shown that consciousness is existence is basically the reality, which is the unchanging factor. And hence, what we have come again proven earlier is that the perceiver, which is basically the pure consciousness, which is I, and the perceived, that object that is perceived, are both basically the same, in the true essence, are basically the same reality, which is that existence consciousness. So that's how the Vedanta arrives at the reality, and it removes the distinctions also between the perceived and perceiver in when we look at it from the reality point of view. As I said, the distinctions are permissible, but only at a transactional level, what we call as Vyavahara Satta in Vedantic terms. Whereas at the level of the true essence, what we call as Paramartha Satta, the existence consciousness is what is the underlying basis for both the perceiver and perceived. Okay. So now coming to the objective reality, as we said earlier, objective reality is denied completely in Vedanta because there is no certainty as such associated with it first. And second thing is, when we say something is object, that reality is an object that can be perceived, then it means it's changeful. And Vedanta, of course, the definition of reality is that which doesn't change. And Vedanta actually also goes to a little bit, I would say, for one step further, and boldly states that whatever we are experiencing currently now, as all these objects, as myself as an individual for that matter, everything is non-existent. And that's a bold statement, and that is actually one needs to dive deep into this, and that's how I think it becomes more experiential and actually illuminating as we dwell upon it more and more. But just of course, for the sake of time, I cannot dive too deep into that. But what I'll try to put is the statement what I mentioned earlier too. If there are the objects that are coming into being at certain point of time, and objects will cease to exist at certain point of time. So basically, what we call as birth and death in terms of a living being. So there was non-existence of that person or a being or entity before, and there's a non-existence after a certain time. And right now, what we are experiencing is existence of that object. So what it means is non-existence has become existence, and existence will become non-existence. In a way, what we are trying to say is matter that was not there somehow gets created from nothing, and then it will get destroyed and again becomes nothing. Again, even with the basic science, of course, this is a flaw, right? So even Vedanta, of course, that we are using that same terminology, what science uses as a matter, what we call in philosophical terms as existence or non-existence. So hence, that objective reality is being negated by Vedanta by using the fundamental of that objective reality itself. Whereas science, for a specific reason, I would say maybe, is that it's sticking with the objective reality um, because of the certain aspects of associated with objective reality, which we'll cover later. I'll explain when we come to the epistemology. Maybe that time it will become clear why we stick with the objective reality in science. So now going by the factors that are facets of reality in Vedanta, which we have covered, I will go faster on these slides because we have already covered a major portion in the previous ones when I was explaining the pure existence and pure consciousness. It's basically immanent and transcendence. Transcendent reality. Immanent means it's basically pervasive. All objects exist in it. Rather, we should not. When we say pervasive, we always think about space, but that's not it. Space is also existing in it. So it's basically an existence that pervades everything, including space also. And it's transcendent. Transcendent, it's basically beyond all observations, beyond all perceptions, beyond all sense of dualities and everything. Nothing can explain it in the sense of when you're explaining something, you are basically defining it. And when you're defining, you're limiting it. So that's how we say Brahman as such in Vedanta cannot be described also by words or thoughts or concepts or anything. It is transcending that also. And in Vedanta, as I said, we are sticking to Advaita Vedanta. So it's basically monism. That is, Brahman alone exists. The reality alone exists. All that we perceive are basically as changing name and form, right, or changing characteristics of that object, again belonging to that five sense perceptions. So those are basically just a superimposition on the underlying reality which is unchanging, and that's what we call as Māyā. The concept of Māyā, everything comes in Vedanta. Okay, I don't want to dive deep into that, right, because that's not the focus of our talk anyway. But that's the point, is basically the transactional reality which is dealing with the changing characteristics of this world, including the perceiver, that I as an individual. All that is at the level of transactional level, which is a superimposition on the reality which is unchanging, which we call as pure consciousness or pure existence. And reality in Vedanta is basically holistic and holographic. Holistic in sense, the study of these transient and impermanent actually gives a step towards understanding that reality which is unchanging, as we just did, in fact. And also the holographic nature is basically you can take any object or any perception. It, again, as we saw earlier in reductionism in science, the micro scale explains the macro scale, right? In that sense, here, uh, here the micro scale and macro scale itself are put on the same plane because the nature of both of them are changeful, right? So they belong to the transactional level of reality, but the core essence of both of them is the same. So that's what we are saying, is you can take either the micro scale or the macro scale, doesn't matter. You choose any object or any perception, and that is a pointer or a doorway towards understanding the reality in Brahman, called Brahman in Vedanta. So in that sense, it's a holographic in sense the minor portion is, it has the complete picture as the major portion too, right? That's what the holography means. um, and absolutism in sense, it is unchanging, it's timeless and eternal, and it is not dependent on anything. That's why it is absolute. So that's basically the characteristics of reality in Vedanta. As I said, again, these are only for understanding purpose. What reality truly is beyond all these concepts and understanding also. But for us to at least intellectually grasp, and so that we can tackle that and go forward, sometimes these pointers, you can say, or indicators of that reality are helpful. But please note that this is not the definition of reality in Vedanta, because that means you're limiting it. I just want to summarize, but maybe I will not dive too deep into it again for lack of time. um, the materialism and spiritualism is what is the fundamental basis of the reality in science and Vedanta. We covered that realism and monism is the two facets of reality. Like they are kind of, you can say, not exactly contradicting each other, but as you can say, as juxtaposing both these facets, you can see that there is a difference, you can say, um, between what is the facet of reality in science and what's the facet of reality in Vedanta. Okay, as I said, I think we'll probably, if anyone is interested, we'll come back to this slide and maybe discuss further later, but I will move ahead. Uh, there is also ongoing research that has happened in the past and also is currently going on, which will challenge this classical point of view of reality in science, what we call as materialistic point of view, the reductionist point of view, and that realism point of view. Right, realism was that human participation is not relevant, or observers participation is not relevant. There's a reality out there which is independent of the observer. And then the reductionism is basically the micro scale explains the macro scale. So all those features of reality, you can say, or classical reality, are challenged by the more modern research, you can say. One example is special theory of relativity, where if you go, I mean, without going to the details of mathematical and physical, the physics point of view, you can simply say the time and length are dependent on the observer's speed of travel related to the speed of light. The closer the observer travels to the speed of light, the time and length variation will be more from what has been observed at rest, right? The observers, if the observer is at rest. So what it shows is that objective reality, what we think of, is basically dependent on the instrumentation itself. And that's the main point of Vedanta itself. What we see out there, we are not sure. It can be debated whether there's something out there. But what we are sure is that the experiences within our mind is what we see of that as a reality out there. right? And so that objective reality is basically what we see as objective reality is only dependent on the instrumentation of senses and mind that we have. Suppose we have an extra sense, suppose of a different nature, right? Other than this five, I can't even fathom, because we cannot fathom anything different from what we have, right? The five. Suppose there's another extra sense, feature of sense, then the reality that we, or the world that we perceive, will be very different. Maybe I'm just giving one crude example. Say we have X-ray vision, right? Suppose, then that's a different kind of reality we will perceive, the world we perceive then. And again, the perception of reality is not necessarily what the reality itself is. What we actually are seeing is, again, as I said, it's basically a modification within us, in our mind frame, right? In the mental stuff, what it calls antakarna. Whereas what reality actually is inexplicable. We don't know. Is there something out there or not? Who knows? But at least we know that these are the experiences of reality that we have within us, and that's what we are handling. So that's basically the level, at the level of science also, that's what we have to be clear about. Although we think that there is something out there, but that can be questioned, and that's what our the special theory of relativity poses a question to us if we hold that view. And then quantum physics, in quantum physics you might have come across something called a quantum entanglement. Basically there's this a quantum system. If you take a quantum system, it basically has multiple states, and the system is said to be existing in those multiple states simultaneously. They have their eigenstates, and there's a probability function associated with each of those states, and so on. But what the actual point is that when you measure that system and you come up with that state of the system that you measured, what happens is all those possible states that was there for the system, they all collapse into one particular one, right? That you measured. So the point is basically that observer contributes to that observation itself. So no longer an observer is different from that reality in that sense. Again, it shakes the point of view of the realism, right, that we came up with for the as a facet for the reality in science. And then lastly, the artificial intelligence. We see that nowadays machines are being created which are very close to human beings. They can think, they can even probably emote and all that. At some point they'll be as good as a human being, if not better, of course. So then what is the difference between a human being and a machine? That question may arise at a certain point, if when we see those machines at a level of human perfection. In fact, as far as the objective reality goes, as objects, like, that are experienced as a matter, there's really no difference unless you bring the consciousness factor. And again, you can also say the consciousness also there in machines and so on. So the point is, at the level of transaction reality vyavhar satta, there's no real difference between a human being and a machine. So we are also breaking those boundaries, that observer and observed is different, or sacrosanct, the qualities are different. That is also being broken. So there are other ongoing research like on consciousness and so on, which also challenging the classical view of reality that is held in science. But let's move to the next one, that epistemology. Basically, epistemology means how do we study this nature, the reality itself. There's a famous quote again from Einstein. I will quickly mention what it means. It's basically saying that um, any student of any science in general, or any field rather, would always look at that epistemology, because that is what helps the person to understand what kind of methods that one can apply to understand the reality. So here, what Albert Einstein says is, uh, how does it happen that a properly endowed natural scientist comes to concern himself with epistemology? Is there not more some valuable work to be done in his specialty? So that's the question generally people ask. Then he says, that's what I hear many of my colleagues ask, and I sense it from many more. But I cannot share this sentiment when I think about the ablest students whom I have encountered in my teaching, that is, those who distinguish themselves by their independence of judgment and not just their quick-wittedness. I can affirm that they had a vigorous interest in epistemology. They happily began discussions about the goals and methods of science, and they showed unequivocally, through tenacious defense of their views, that the subject seemed more important to them. So, as I said, the point is that the true scientist, a true student, a good student, would always look at the scope of what kind of methods that can be used within that framework, so that the nature or the reality can be studied as defined, right? So that's the main point of this study of epistemology also. You can develop two kinds of relationships between epistemology and ontology. Epistemology is the methods that are used to study the reality, and ontology is the nature of reality itself, right? So what are the two kinds of relationships? First thing is you determine the method, and then you define the reality. So first thing you can say is like, okay, I have these instruments of senses and mind. This is what I will use. And then based on that instrumentation, I can define what reality is. That will become an objective reality. For the other way you can approach is, I will define reality in the broadest sense of terms, and then I will determine what kind of methods are available to study and understand it. So here you can say the nature of reality is determined first, and then we see what are methods and instruments that are available for us to study it. I would say, in my view, that science has taken this determine and define method, which is basically you determine what instruments you want to use, and that's how you confine ourselves to that framework. And then we define the reality, basically saying it's an objective reality, that the objective reality is as reality is a object that can be perceived. Whereas in Vedanta, we define reality in a very broadest sense as that which doesn't change. Now then we have to also determine how to understand or experience that reality. And of course that's why in Vedanta the tools of science, senses and mind are not applicable. One has to go beyond them too. And there are various methods prescribed to it. We will come to it. But again, that will not be the focus of this talk anyway. But the point is, there are two different ways to approach. The two different relationships that can be developed between the epistemology and ontology. And it seems like science and Vedanta have taken the two different ways. Now, epistemology in science, we can broadly put in three categories as induction, deduction, and abduction, three methods. And again, for sake of time, maybe I will.
Yes, Srikanth,
I
if you
will.
could wrap up in 3-4 minutes.
I think so. That's what I thought. Okay, so let's move ahead and see that these three methods I think are fairly well known. I will just go ahead with the Vedantic terms. Vedanta also has 6 methods, which we call as pramanas. I'm sorry. Yeah, this is a slide. Um, and there is some commonality between these methods of the. I will skip these quotes also. These quotes are actually interesting, and they're sorry, my slides are somehow stuck. Okay. Sorry. The slides are getting stuck. So okay, I please pardon me. I will just go slowly. So because I'm trying to move forward and it's not moving, and then it's going forward quite a bit. Okay, that's the next one. Okay, this next one. Okay, let me do one thing. I will do without the slide present. I think that's faster. Okay. We look at the goals and practices. The goal in science is basically to know the truth in the physical realm. Again, there are various practices that are done within science, but in the goal of Vedanta is to realize that I am that reality, and that's the main focus of Vedanta. Whereas in science, we just try to understand what that objective reality is, which is different from me. Okay, that we keep that distinction anyway. And then, as I said, the practices within Vedanta are called yogas, and there are various yogas broadly classified into 4. And finally, I would like to go for the utility part. I think that's more important because ultimately, at the end of the day, we want to see how it benefits us. What do we get out of it, right? So that's the main point. As an individual, every one of us really look forward to is happiness, right? That's the main thing for focus for every individual. We want to be happy. Now, what Vedanta says is that happiness is basically you yourself. It's not something out there that you need to get from an object. So when we take, for example, for the science point of view, when you take the reality as an object out there, we always in the realm of subject-object interaction. So even the happiness is what we associate with generally with an object outside there. Whereas Vedanta brings that aspect much closer. In fact, rather so close that it says actually that is you yourself. There is a again, you can go through some intellectual analysis to come to that conclusion too, that happiness is basically you yourself. Because if it is an object, then it doesn't give happiness always. It doesn't give happiness to all, because if it is intrinsic to an object, then it has to give happiness to all. Again, it requires certain liking by us, by the subject, for the object to give happiness, right? The same, if I don't like that object, then it doesn't give me happiness either, right? So there is a very subjective element associated with the happiness that comes from an object. So what we can conclude is happiness is not within that object, but happiness is in the subject itself. And again, we can do some certain analysis and come to the conclusion that happiness is you yourself, and that's what the Vedanta says. Now, so finally, what we come to the utility point of view is understanding the reality. Suppose if I understand reality, what is the benefits I get out of it? In science, of course, the satisfaction is there that you have discovered something new. There may be some reputation, accolades, and some financial rewards, but all this we should note are temporary. So there's always an urge for something new to be done, something more to be done. Once even certain things have been received, there's always a ongoing um, what you call ongoing movement within us to move forward and to also get more and more. Whereas in Vedanta, what we say is the self-realization. Basically, in the current ignorance point of view, we think we are an individual, but actually we are that reality itself, which is unchanging, and that leads to a permanent bliss, and that it's basically brings an end to our pursuits through as an object to be achieved, something to be achieved. And also in general, in that practice, in the practice of realizing our true nature, we also develop various traits like love, empathy, morality, ethics, compassion, and so on. Now these are not necessarily developed in the field of science when you are doing any scientific experiments or discoveries and so on. So as an overall character, as a personality, there is an all-round development in Vedanta as compared to science. So finally, what is the outcome of that experience of reality in, say, in science? What we call as it will be like I am existent, I am conscious, I'm happy. Instead of I, you can say any object also. I'm just putting an example of I here. So that object exists. That object may not be conscious or conscious, depends on whether you see a sentient or insentient beings and so on. And again, it can be happy or sorrow. Basically, it goes in pairs of opposites because it is in the realm of subject-object relationship. Whereas in Vedanta, when the experience of reality is basically you see the underlying essence is same between me and everything in the world, and there is that eternal calmness, peace, and all that associated with it, and hence it is, you can say it's like a culmination of experience, so to say. So finally, I will conclude with this saying that the choice, whether it is in between science and Vedanta, whether you want to have that harmony or discordance, is actually, it can be left to an individual. Let them make their choice. I don't think as any one of us has to make a judgment on that factor. But I think whoever makes that subjective judgment for oneself should always be clear the whole aspect of what is science and what is Vedanta, and see what is applicable to their way of life, their way of doing things, their way of understanding reality, and so on. I think without that, one should not come into any false notion or quick judgment, misconception, and so on. So I would encourage everyone to study more if they're not aware of Vedanta, or if people who are associated with Vedanta, if they're not aware of science, maybe they should actually take their scientific temper and adopt in their Vedantic methods too. Actually, Vedanta in fact includes a scientific temper, but just in case, if they are very from the religious point of view, if they have not followed that Vedantic principles, maybe they can adopt the scientific temper that's there and look at things in a rational and objective way also, which will help. So the healthy exchange between science and Vedanta is always there, and I would encourage everyone to do that individual study and um, enrich their lives and experience themselves, rather than making a blanket notion or blanket opinion saying like this is better or this is not better or this is higher and lower. I think that would be my take, at least. With that, I think I'll end my talk here. Thank you everyone for the patient hearing. So Kanji, please.
Thank you so much, Srikanth, for this wonderful exposition, so logical, so step by step. And as you said in the very end, the decision is pretty much at the individual level. We don't really have to try to even make judgments at the societal level or group level. So that then brings us to the Q&A part. So if you could please switch on your videos and unmute yourself, then we can go into the Q&A. So Srikanth, you can stop this sharing. We will now...
Sharing, okay.
Yeah.
Srikanth, thank you very much. Excellent talk.
So
I really,
Srikanth, this is Professor Vijay Chalibendra. He is also a professor of solid mechanics for me.
Okay.
Yeah, I really enjoy, I thoroughly enjoy, and I wish we have recorded this because, as you know,
we have recorded it. Yeah,
we did. Okay,
yes.
Thank you, Suku. Would you please share us the recording? That would be great because, as you
Yes,
know,
yes.
our
We
human
upload
mind.
it on our Center for Indic Studies YouTube channel, and maybe in a day or two. So.
Wonderful. So, as you know, the human mind needs repetitive, saying of these things what you just said. I think I really love to listen to you again and again. Is there any YouTube video that completes this whole presentation? What did you make anywhere else the same presentation so that we can actually go through, because we kind of rush this in the end. We're not able to complete the whole thing in a given time.
Well, portions of it, of course, I didn't make personally. Of course, the portions of it will be seen in other presentations elsewhere by. But I haven't made this presentation anywhere before. This is just made for this particular occasion.
Is it? Okay. Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Vijay. Any other question for Srikanth? Yes, Professor Papu, please unmute yourself.
Thank you very much for such a comprehensive summary, comprehensive at the same time summarizing the main issues in Vedanta and the science. Yeah, it's a wonderful presentation. I liked it. Let me try to summarize for some of the people who are not that much familiar with the whole horizons of Vedanta. The problem, at least I used to tell in the class, is very simple. The thing is, to understand Vedanta, you start with the assumption something exists. Okay? Nobody can deny that. Something exists. To exist is to be kind of a series specific, as Berkeley said. To exist is to exist in somebody's mind. Okay? How do you know that something exists? Because I see it, I feel it, and so on. It is in somebody's mind. Right? Now, the mind is the one who not only knows that something exists, but it also knows that it knows. So whenever I know something, I not only know that I know, not only that I know, but I also know that I know. Right? That is fundamental to this one. So that you say that something exists means actually to exist is to be eternal. Right? And what is eternal here is something to be in somebody's consciousness, so to say. You cannot deny that something exists. Right? Though the opposite of existence, abhava, opposite of existence is opposite of existence, bhava is abhava. Okay? Does non-existence exist? There's a contradiction. If you know non-existence, it is something. You cannot know nothing. Though particular aspects of non-existence you can know. In the Māyā, there are ways in which non-existence exists, like purva bhava, for example, starts with something like that, archanta bhava, and so on and so forth. That is to say, there are varieties of non-existence, but there are no varieties of existence. Existence is one thing. The varieties of non-existence goes something like this, one is pragabhava. This computer, before it is made, exists, is non-existent. Once it is made, that non-existence has become existence. So, non-existence, for example, has an end. So, once I made the computer, it is not non-existent. Before it was made, its non-existence is eternal. Now, I throw away this computer, destroy it. In that case, its non-existence from now onwards is eternal. Forever, it is non-existence. Then there is something like a Achanta Bhava. The computer doesn't exist as this typewriter. They're mutually non-existent each other. And so on and so forth, In other words, the eternity also belongs to non-existence, but it is not like the eternity of existence. See? So, and so on. So that is the main thing, So I have so many people, especially in my Vedanta congresses, we always had a lot of scientists attending, George Sudarshan and so many, there's a big group. They used to come and they were all Vedantins, physicists turned to Vedantins and so on. And it was a wonderful thing, that you are pursuing this way of thinking and making the Vedanta accessible to the popular people. It's a great paper, and I hope it has even the potential to write into a paper, okay, and into a book rather. Thank you very much for the wonderful.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Professor Pappu. Any other question for Srikanth? I mean, you can type it in the chat box or you can raise your hand. Okay, I don't see any.
I had a question.
Yes, Mosumi, go ahead, please.
Hello, Srikanth. My name is Mosmi. I'm a grad student in data science at UMass only. So I just wanted to ask, do you see any potential collaboration between all the Vedantic principles that we were going through and cognitive science to study consciousness more comprehensively? Because I've done a few projects on cognitive science, right? And what we were usually covering was just the empirical methods, right? Like focusing on neural correctness, brain activity, behavioral analysis, and everything. So through the presentation, I could really understand that Vedanta could provide very qualitative insights and the, what do we say, the sort of framework that we would use on a quantitative manner, because that's what we do with science and data science and studying. We just need those, not numbers, but something which is, again, the difference between Vedanta and applied science, what you were talking about, have a realistic approach over cognitive science. So do you see any potential collaboration between both of the fields?
Yeah, of course, I'm not well versed with your field, cognitive sciences and so on. But I'll just put my point of view. It may not be accurate. Yeah,
Oh, no,
please
sure.
disregard if it is not applicable also.
No,
But
absolutely.
my understanding is of generally the scientific methods. As I said, the framework we have defined is
Yeah.
it's a very specific way of doing things, and
Okay.
I'm not sure if I think it is still opening up a bit now. What again, as I said, is a subjective view, and my understanding is
Yeah,
that
there are a lot
uh,
of research papers that I've read on cognitive science trying to connect quantum physics and metaphysics with what we are studying in the Vedantas and stuff, right? Like connecting Gita with science. I've read a
right,
lot
right.
of papers about it. Yes.
As long as, see, the thing is, in earlier times at least, maybe even when I was doing my research work and all, even before
Of
that,
course.
probably that is it's not so acceptable. This was not seen as even mainstream collaboration with any of this, so to say, metaphysical area of work. But I think, as you're saying, maybe now the new trend is people are a bit more open.
Yes.
So that way it is fine. I would say it's good in that sense. We are accepting to go beyond the framework that we have confined ourselves in with, right, to begin with.
Of course.
So if that is the case, yes, then there is, of course, certainly there is a lot of scope to do research. As you said, there is so many principles that we can actually benefit from. taking from Vedanta, of course, and then applying a scientific I mean as a physical science point of view, as you said, cognitive science, suppose, as some measurable quantities that can be put to. Now, when I say measurable, we have to be careful, because the principles themselves say that it cannot be objectified, right? I mean, that's the basic thing of the
Yeah.
Vedanta. So what we meant by measurable is the measurements are such that, in fact, I didn't dwell deep upon that epistemology of Vedanta, the 6 pramanas, what we call.
Yeah.
Those 6 pramanas there, pramanas means basically methods of knowledge.
Okay.
The methods, those 6 methods there are 5 methods which are very specific to an object to experience. And there's one which we call as verbal testimony, which is basically Shabda Pramana, which is basically scriptures and sages. Let's disregard it for now. That can be equivalent to, actually, you can say, some scientific laws, but maybe we'll not get there. Let's look at the other 5 pramanas, which are more of an objective experiences. Now, these objective experiences in Vedanta are used only to deny the objective reality in Vedanta. So you are using those pramanas, actually, like direct perception, inference, everything. What we call as the reality in Vedanta, these 5 pramanas are not applicable there. But we come to that understanding only through those pramanas first. The pramanas are used to get to that understanding that these are not sufficient enough to be applied to understand the reality.
Yes, but experiencing it on a personal level.
Yeah,
I mean, it's
right.
about perspective, Yeah.
Correct. So now, if you come to that way of doing things or understanding, if you bring that to science, what my take would be is, you're breaking a lot of barriers there, in a way, accepted norms, rather, I would say.
Of course.
So to fit it into the framework of science, which should be again acceptable, as you said, of course, it's a research. You are part of a community. Your work has to be acceptable, and
Definitely
all that.
published and stuff.
There are a lot of constraints and restraints in the scientific community. You cannot go really in a very broad sense. But I'm pretty sure there is, as you were also pointing out, is that there is a lot more leeway now, and a lot more focus, and a lot more exploration that can be done for future collaboration, where some principles of Vedanta can be applied, and also put out as more as a thought experiment. Like, not everything can be put in the physical sense, more of an intellectual concept, and maybe that should be acceptable to a certain level, and hopefully that will also encourage more collaboration, as you said.
Got it. Thank you so much for answering that.
Thank you.
Very
Thank
good,
you.
Srikanth. So I don't see any questions in the chat box nor any hand raise. So this is perfect time for us to say again, thanks to Srikanth for this wonderful presentation. And as I said to Vijay, this is being recorded, and in a day or two, we will upload it to our YouTube channel, Center for Indic Studies YouTube channel. Our next seminar will be in February. Our semester kind of ends in a week, and then our spring semester starts on January 20th. So most likely our next seminar will be early February. Right now I don't have the date or the speaker, but the moment we finalize that, we will let you know. So thank you so much. Namaste.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Namaste.